Somehow, the Elisabetta incident had probably been the least terrifying, or at least in the aftermath it had been. In the moment, however, it had been soul-shattering when the woman had snuck up behind them as Aizawa was handcuffing the last of 3 unconscious villains and grabbed his kid by the throat, the faint choking sound all that alerted Aizawa as he spun back around, only to see his kid in the grip of another villain. Long, dark brown hair cascaded over the vigilante's shoulders, but it was the fanged smile, wide and unhinged, reminding of a snake about to slacken its jaw to swallow its prey whole, that sent a thrill of protective fear down Aizawa's spine. "Let him go," he growls, ready to flare his quirk up, for all the good it will do. Kidilante had mentioned before that her quirk was a mutant transformative type, and thus would be largely unaffected by his erasure. Still though, every little advantage or distraction would be worth it to keep his kid safe. "Oh no, hero, that isn't going to happen. Young, sweet blood is too good to waste. I'll drain him dry," she coos. Aizawa keeps his eyes trained on her, but he still notices how his kid's chest heaves, just once, and she cackles at that, the sound ringing through the alley like a death knell but grating like nails on chalkboard, before his hand twitches towards his utility belt. And Aizawa won't allow his gaze to follow the movement, so he thinks. For fuck's sake, what's in a throwing knife? His kid has a throwing knife. Multiple actually. Okay, good, that will help. If you let go of him, I can dash, please, let the kid understand his cue. No bargaining, darling. I'll take dash. Aizawa taps his thigh twice, whatever I want dash. Suddenly, the kid is moving, dodging away to one side, bringing up his right hand behind his head, the glint of a knife flashing in the dim light. Aizawa is sending his capture scarf forward, intent on pulling his brat out of danger, but they underestimated the grip of the villainess. His kid is half away, but she still has one sharp-nailed hand tight around his throat, flexing in pain from the knife buried in it, and another hand clasped on his shoulder. As he tried to escape, she had leant into his movement, face first, dodging the capture scarf. Her fangs were buried deep in the brat's shoulder. Kid dash. But Aizawa can do nothing for a long second as Kidilante thrashes and twists for a second before slackening into the woman's hold. She looks up at the hero's shout, still drinking, golden eyes gleaming. Aizawa can practically feel the oiliness of her smirk, and it is that knowledge that sends him rocketing forward, a kick aimed straight for her nose. Elisabetta drops the kid, a single drop of blood tracing from her lips, and the pro is instantaneously torn between catching his kid and pursuing her. Then he's half-crouched, supporting the too light weight of his brat. "Kid, are you?" He trails off at the non-responsive lethargy of the vigilante. There's nothing indicating any kind of awareness. Even at his urgent, insistent tone or touch, the younger doesn't react at all, not even a twitch. And it is only now that Aizawa remembers part of the rumor surrounding Elisabetta, that she is less a vampire and more a vampire bat. Her saliva thus contained an anticoagulant element and apparently even a sort of sedative, though that was theorized to be a mutation. Which was probably why the kid was unresponsive. Fuck. Still, it wasn't an overly serious wound. The kid would survive. Aizawa would just have to watch over him for the night. And that, he could easily do. First things first though, he bandaged over his brat's hoodie and then rang the police and his agency. The alley was still littered with 3 unconscious thugs after all. It had been a straightforward evening so far, nothing unexpected. Aizawa had no ongoing investigations, so tonight's patrol was mainly taking out any small fry that he came across. There'd been one would-be sexual assault, and Aizawa was always incredibly glad to be in time for those. He'd been there for the aftermath before and he wouldn't wish that upon anyone, and 2 attempted muggings. By the 3rd incident, Kidilante had dropped in to help the victim gather up their groceries whilst Aizawa finished restraining the villain. Then the 2 had continued on their way, snarking quietly at each other as they focused most of their attention on the streets below them. An uproar an alley or 3 away had them glancing at each other before immediately sprinting and leaping over the few rooftops, taking a moment to assess the situation before each drop-kicking one of the fighting villains. The 2 men, both vaguely familiar in the way that most mid-rank and relatively well-known local villains were, had been arguing loudly, quirks beginning to crackle and smoke respectively when Aizawa and his kid dropped in. Literally. Fire Fist went down with the single strike to the neck, but shock therapy was quicker and Kidilante was lighter. And so his brat's kick clipped the edge of the villain's neck and, even as he stumbled, the man was able to lash out with his electric whips, two of them digging into Kidilante's thigh. Aizawa could feel his kid gritting his teeth, biting back a scream, even as the vigilante bounced on his feet to land, already striking again, taking out the man's knees, sending him careening back into the alley wall, unconscious as his head cracked against the brick. "Oi, kid, you alright?" And yet again, Aizawa abandoned protocol of restraining adversaries to bustle, stride, "Thank you," over to the vigilante and start mother-henning him, checking him over, "Thank you." Holes were burned through the brat's trousers, the smell of smoldering fabric acrid and that of burnt flesh sickening. "Why yeah. No worries, Eraser Dad." "Fuck there's not," he retorts, crouching to get a better look at his kid's injuries. "There's a thing called grammar. Honestly, and to think you're a TYOW." And Aizawa immediately flinched away from where he'd started probing around the wounds. "Sorry kid. Doubly so, this is gonna need recovery girl." "Fuck," he whines, drawing it out long and low in a pained groan, not enjoying the deep electrical burns at all. "Language brat. English, if you want." And if it wasn't for being best friends with Present Mike, Aizawa admittedly probably wouldn't have understood that. He personally would have forgotten all but useful for heroing English the day after their final exams. "Hush brat. Ring recovery girl for me, here. Catch." And Aizawa lets himself chuckle once, short, sharp and still too tense, as the kid fumbles with the phone. Not like he could parkour or fight quirked men thrice his size and twice his age without breaking a sweat, then not even catch something thrown at him. Of course nor. Weird child. What if I don't know the passcode? I know you do, you little sneak. Don't be coy. The kid harumphs, then visibly winces, and Aizawa tightens the handcuffs on shock therapy maybe a little too much. Tsukachi won't blame him. Actually, they end up commiserating over not getting to punch the bastard. What else are friends for? By the time they meet recovery girl at Aizawa's apartment, the burns are already at the point that they scab and scar, even with her healing. Still, it means he will only need a day or two of no strenuous activity, you hear, young man? The kid nods along dutifully, but Aizawa can already tell that the kid is plotting. Once he wakes up from his healing-induced nap, Aizawa will make sure to lecture him. Until then, he'll let the kid rest. The little shit's gone by morning, out the window without a word. As per usual. Brat. But well, at least he doesn't come across Aizawa on his patrols for a whole 2 days. Maybe the kid really did take a break. Aizawa can hope, at least. He always will. The USJ incident is, well, it's a mess, to be honest. The villain's attack, surprise surprise. Well, let's rewind a bit. Aizawa's kid had been buzzing the previous night, excited for something he wouldn't tell the underground hero about. All Might used up all of his powered-up time merely on the way to school, and then the class as a whole was very rowdy all morning, with only small pockets of tranquility, notably, the odd little trio of Todoroki, Shinso, and Midoriya, all talking to each other in sign language. Aizawa had noticed that budding friendship previously, but apparently it had solidified already, to a point. In conclusion, Eraserhead was already fucking exhausted. Then a bunch of villains decide to turn up and fucking attack his batch of new kids. Because what else would they do? As the black void fog portal forms down in the plaza, resulting in a small flood of thugs, plus a couple of ridiculously extra leaders, Aizawa whirls to face them and immediately starts to shout for the kids to get the hell out of there, contact the main school, absolutely whatever they need, oh get out of this all safe. Somewhat unexpectedly, there's another voice joining his, this one lacking the stutter that he's already come to expect. Ida-kun. Go, now, get help, you're the fastest. And there's an odd surety, certainty, even command to that voice. It is the tone of someone who is keeping control and who has experience doing so. Experience keeping civilians safe and villains afraid. But no, now's not the time to ponder that, Aizawa tells himself. He's got to try and get any semblance of advantage that he can weasel out of their attackers right now. Even if that means jumping straight into the fray. Whilst their teacher, his Dadzawa no, is already leaping into battle, Izuku is attempting to corral his classmates into some semblance of a coherent defensive unit. He's told Ida to go, using that tone that gets civilians who are frozen in fear to flee to safety, the voice that is a sort of soft command and took him a year to get right, and the taller boy escapes through the gates just as they snap shut, catching a bit of his armor with an awful crunching sound. Luckily, it only looks to be his heel, so he might not be injured. Refocusing on the other 18 of them, Izuku starts to speak, only to be cut off by more whirling black portals that, even as he jumps away to try and avoid them, catching a hold of Shinso to try and drag him to safety too, he gets caught up in one of them that forms a good meter above the ground. Then there's a blur of darkness, a rushing of non-existent wind, and he's plunging into water, shockingly cold, losing his grip on Shinsu's indigo jumpsuit, instantly trying to assess his surroundings beyond the cold, dark water. So much pressure, movement, cold, more movement, a flash of something that's not Shinso. Oh fuck, that's a villain, and he pulls his baton, instantaneously going to use the shock, then realizing that would be a pretty shitty idea, then making do with jabbing it straight forward into something's face, hoping the direct movement wouldn't allow too much resistance to lessen the power of his blow. It seems to work, somewhat, as he strikes something hard that gives way, then a strong lasso, no, Ajui's tongue, is latching around his waist and he's being dragged up and away. Instead of using Mineta's balls, Izuku and the other two go running through the now sinking ship, finding some bleach and other ingredients, creating some bombs. Grabbing some extra stuff, he preps some rip-off smoke bombs. He doesn't trust those in his utility belt, what with being submerged for a good minute or two. Still, they could be useful as a feint. Regardless, they create a few homemade bombs, or shipmade, rather, and then Shinso yells as loud as he can. "You lot are pieces of shit, you know that?" And the half a dozen or so replies he quickly orders to swim over to the stern of the ship. They all do so, treading water in a semicircle, and that's when Izuku wraps a firm arm around each of his companions' waists and, in tandem, he and Ajui push off simultaneously with Shinso throwing down the bombs behind them. The concussive force gives them an extra boost, even if it does lessen their control over their own trajectory, and it will at least give those villains that Shinso had managed to control a headache and more likely a trip to dreamland for the time being. Their landing is messy, but no bones get broken, only Shinsu's ankle sprained, and that's pretty damn good if you ask Izuku. Then he has to convince them to follow his next plan. "I'm going down to the plaza. I need you two to circle around the zones. Try and collect everyone together. The more of us in one spot, the better. Yes, we'll make a bigger target, but with our inexperience, there's safety in numbers." "Understood." And whilst the two both hesitate, Shinso looking physically pained at the suggestion, both spend a few too many breaths trying to convince Izuku to come with them, or to let them come with him. He is unrelenting and reminds them that arguing now is just wasting time. At that, they nod, determined now, and immediately set off to find whoever they can. Izuku, with that, takes one massive breath to collect himself, then sprints towards the plaza. Eraserhead, Dadzawa, Eraserdad, Dadzawa, save him, his mind chants, screams, sobs, desperate beyond belief, is down there and he will do whatever it takes to save the man. Absolutely anything. Eraserhead, not Dadzawa, not now, can't give that away, not ever, particularly not in front of villains, keep it secret, keep it zipped, is on the ground, head being shoved further and further against the dirt, blood already beginning to pool. Some pale arse guy with a metric fuckton of hands is standing by, laughing, only turning to face Izuku when he yells. "Oi handjob. Yeah, you, fuckhands McMike, what the fuck are you trying to do? People are gonna call you a pedo, you know, coming into a kid's lesson like this. And honestly, that's not a good look. So last season. And damn it, his snarky side needs to be controlled, but he's nervous as fuck, so he's defaulting. Defaulting to his vigilante persona. Yeah, not the best idea ever, but it'll do for now. At least it might drag attention away from his dad's, from Eraserhead. You're a brat. Just some NPC. Weirdo growls, one of his hands, an actually attached one, raising to scratch at the gross flakiness of his neck, already red raw. Izuku would be tempted to dismiss the freak as a mentally disturbed lowlife if not for the bloody mania in those crimson eyes and the situation as a whole. So, when the man is busy muttering to himself and scratching frantically, Izuku bursts forward in a flurry of movements. He gets in one solid hit to the abdomen before the pale guy is parrying with his own hands. When he catches the student's arm with a glancing open-handed blow, there's a flash of pain, then wet numbness as an entire patch of his top is gone and some of the skin beneath begins to disintegrate too. Fuck, a 5-point contact disintegration quirk. Not fun to fight at all. But still, Izuku keeps on fighting, taking several seconds of damage, barely noticing any of it as he keeps on aiming blow after blow at the man, trying not to panic as the giant monster villain stays still, Aizawa not getting more hurt, but certainly not in a position to escape, and Izuku's bow staff is getting blown away in the wind, patch by patch, inch by inch. Then he gets a good blow in, right on the villain's throat and manages to activate the shock feature. The weirdo, Shigaraki Tamura, apparently, judging by Mist Guy's exclamation, jerks back, limbs spasming a bit, and is whipped away by another damnable black portal. His fading voice echoes in the space in front of Izuku. Nomu. Get the green-haired NPC. And there is a roar echoing through the plaza, then a mass of darkness is in Izuku's face and he's pummeled backwards by what must have been a massive fist, his breath gone in an instant, a worrying little series of snaps echoing through his chest, his stomach left behind as he flies back to hit a wall. And, before he can stand up again, the Nomu is already lumbering forwards once more. However, it is taking its time now, moving slowly, and Izuku levers himself up, leaning heavily on his bow staff, not wanting to trust its compromised structure but, right now, with no other choice. By the time the Nomu is only 10 meters away, he is standing without it and holding it in front of him, braced, trying to decide how the fuck he should approach this fight. Well, how to make it a fight instead of a one-sided smackdown. As such, just as the Nomu is getting within its own range, Izuku darts forward, pushing through his broken ribs and various disintegration wounds, getting within its reach and jamming his bow straight up under its beak chin thing, determined to electrocute the thing. And he does. But it only flinches, jerks, wobbles, before stumbling a little back, leaving Izuku more vulnerable to another attack. Gritting his teeth, he needs to be faster, faster, faster. He needs to be the quickest he's ever been if he wants to escape, survive, make sure his dad is okay. He takes a not very calculated risk and decides to fucking yeet himself forward, forcing his body to jump, managing to stand on the Nomu's arm as it reaches for him, then run the 2 meters or so in a single swaying step to be atop its shoulder, now bringing his bow down as hard as he can in its grotesque brain, the metal finally splintering apart in his hands before he can electrocute the thing, but it still freezes in place, stuttering to a quick stop. And Izuku falls off. Landing on the ground, not quite twisting enough to catch himself, definitely does his ribs no favors. Ow, yeah, no, that one's probably just gone through a lung judging by how his breath isn't really coming back. Oh fuck, that hurts, but he really needs to check on Dadzawa. Get up, get you. And with that he blacks out. Hitoshi and Shudo were at the head of the group that were racing back to the central plaza. Knowing Izuku was there, Kami, it was horrific. And what they arrived to was even worse. A very battered Izuku, visibly bleeding in places, including his face, was facing that giant monster thing. He had just sent it jerking back when he abruptly runs a few steps then jumps, landing almost impossibly on the thing's arm, taking a single long stride to plunge something, what looks like the remains of his staff, into the thing's exposed brain. And they would cheer, would celebrate, if they didn't have to continue simply watching in morbid fascination, too far away to help, as he falls back, off of the monster, landing badly, half crouched, half sprawled, and instantly tried to stand once more, something a gross white and red poking out of his side, and was feverishly muttering something before he just face-planted, eyes closed and expression a grimace. Now, the sheer amount of blood is obvious, his costume in so many tatters, completely gone in some places. Yet even whilst blacking out, he was visibly reaching forwards, towards Aizawa-sensei, who looks almost as bad. Shuto is the first to move, sprinting forwards, making a beeline for their fallen friend. As soon as he moves, Hitoshi is quick to follow, catching up in a few strides as they pelt side by side, desperate to do whatever they can to help. To keep Izuku alive. First things first, getting him away from the monster, just in case it isn't truly dead or unconscious or whatever it is. Moving as carefully as possible, Hitoshi helps to get Izuku carefully balanced in Shuto's arms, not really wanting to move him, but needing to both get him somewhere safer and closer to the entrance for when the ambulances that are surely coming arrive. And, ever so carefully, they pick their way back towards the entrance, Hitoshi ensuring Shuto won't trip or be at any risk of dropping their friend, even as he monitors said greenette, keeping an eye on the various bleeds and that rib. He doesn't know what he'd do if they did look to get worse, but he would do something. Anything. Finally, they come to a stop near the doors. Should I set him down? Shuto murmurs, eyes conflicted, a deep scowl marring his pretty features. Hitoshi can only stay neutral, choosing to nod and help him as they get Izuku into what seems like the best possible position on the ground, his head pillowed on the insomniac's lap, both of the teams carefully ignoring how much blood was still going everywhere. You too. I have some bandages and other medical kit, does Mito, Yaoyorozu's offer of help ends in a horrified gasp that attracts several more of their classmates' attention. Immediately, several of them are crowding closer, a few sobbing, at the awful sight of Izuku bleeding out and pale as snow. If they'd thought Aizawa-sensei was bad, those bandages would be appreciated. Shuto manages to speak up, interrupting that anguished silence, seemingly blank, despite the deep red stains that have darkened his jumpsuit. That are now doing the same to Hitoshi's. Fortunately, Yamamo is quick to start creating strips of white, sterile cloth, and she works with Shuto to carefully apply pressure to the worst of the wounds, although they honestly don't know what to do with the rib. They had gone to apply pressure around the protruding bone, but Izuku had started to shift and whimper and, sharing a glance, they tacitly decided to leave it for now. It really wasn't bleeding much. The actual problem was how Izuku barely seemed to be breathing, or rather that his breaths were shallow and seemed wet. There was a horrible bubbling, rasping noise with every breath he took, each quieter than the last, and, glancing down the length of Izuku's body, trying to assess what they might have missed, Shuto abruptly noticed that his fingers were turning a little blue. Just as he was about to panic, the sound of sirens began to wail in through the entrance. And, just as they all started to turn to the doors, All Might came bursting in, his mouth open to bellow out an "I'm here," but he stops short at the sight that meets him. Aizawa, 13 and Midoriya all prone, heavily injured, attended to by various members of the class. The rest of them were huddled together. Nobody was without cuts and bruises. "Hello children," his voice is gentle, yet it carried confidently through the plaza. One of the girls started crying loudly. "It's all right now, we're here." And indeed, just as he says that, there is a rush of several more teachers, heroes, arriving, closely followed by a wave of policemen and paramedics. The class began to relax. They were safe now after all. Izuku wakes up, apparently, who knows how many hours later, in a hospital bed. He's aching and is covered in bandages, but he's alive and he has priorities. Accordingly, Izuku does something dumb. He disconnects himself from all of the annoying machines, turning them all off first to keep them quiet, then opens his room window to case the area. Muzutafu General Hospital, the hero ward? Well duh, because he's a UA student, he chides himself. That makes sense. Turning back to his room, he takes a moment to locate the cupboard that doubtless holds his bag and school clothes are all in there. Digging to the very bottom of said bag, wrapped up in a spare blazer, is his vigilante kit, a simple black hoodie, albeit with extra Kevlar-woven padding from a grateful victim that he kept in loose contact with, and a pair of black leggings. Plus his emergency utility belt. It doesn't hold half as much as his standard one, hero or vigilante, but it's enough in a punch. Quickly changing, he then turns back to the window. If he's already in the hero ward, then Dadzawa will doubtless be around somewhere. Now, he just needs to find him. After the USJ, the second night of Aizawa being holed up in the same hospital room, he has a late-night visitor. He's woken up from a light, drug-induced doze at his window being slid open and a young voice muttering something about how hero wards need better security, how an underground hero needs looking after better. If a quirkless vigilante can get in, then who else could get in? Any villain with a brain could, that's for Sue. Hey kiddo, he croaks, bandages itchy against his skin. Hey Dadzawa. And everything that cheery tone is utterly fake. Aizawa struggles to sit up some, glad for his kid pressing the button that helps to raise the head of his bed. As soon as he's halfway upright enough, Aizawa immediately lifts his casted arms up into the air. Come here kiddo. Come here, he coaxes, talking low and smooth like he does with his stray cats. He hasn't even finished before there's a warm, shuddering body pressed carefully into his arms, such thin arms, despite the muscle, wrapped tightly but cautiously around his middle. Aizawa brings his casts gently against the brat's back, pressing him close, cursing the fact that he can't actually hold the kid, cradle his kid, like he wants to. Particularly when the kid's rambling habit is showing, a litany of murmurs of, I thought I lost you, and I need you Dadzawa, and please, you can't do that again, you scared me so much. They fall asleep like that, leaning into each other, so careful of hurting each other yet needing to know that they're there and safe and alive. When Aizawa and Izuku woke up the next morning, sleeping in the man's hospital room, neither comfortable or pain-free but too glad to see each other alive for it to matter, one of the first things the underground hero said was, I'm glad you're alive kiddo. I heard you yelling at Shigaraki. Dumb move, but thank you. Just learn to value yourself more, okay brat? And whilst Izuku temporarily flinches because fuck, Dadzawa knows who he is, he forces himself to calm down after a second, carefully shifting to sit on the edge of his pseudo-father's bed instead of slumping against him in a way that was doing neither of them any favors. I'm sorry I never said dash. Don't mention it kiddo. Just know that I'm adopting you now. And after a couple of silent, stony seconds, both of them snorted and tactfully ignored the way that Izuku's eyes are leaking like a faucet, and his shoulders are hitching with barely their sobs. Why yeah, alright. That might be fun. Heroics isn't a game. I'll expel whoever comes last, Aizawa returns, harking back to his first meeting with his kid's real identity. Said kid laughs again, less sob and more giggle this time, and the man counts it as a victory. Neither of their injuries are as severe as they probably should have been. Izuku is left with several scars. A patch of his cheek, curving down his jaw and just under his ear is left weirdly puckered and pink. A total of 3 similar areas decorate his arms, and a final patch, larger than the rest, mars his collarbone and shoulder. His lung and ribs were set and partially healed by Recovery Girl, with the only true consequences being some fragility for a while. But, after a few months, they should be pretty much as strong as ever. As such, he's being pulled out of hero training for a while, but Dadzawa just tells him to use the opportunity to focus on analysis. If it's to Nedzu's satisfaction, he'll receive full credits for the time being. Izuku grins ferally at that, eyes glittering with something that would send a chill down the spine of anyone but Eraserhead or Nedzu. Luckily, they're the only ones in the room to see it. Aizawa's arms are still broken quite badly, but Recovery Girl can heal them more, as his face never got that second bit of serious trauma from being smashed post-saving Azui. In other words, his orbital floor never got shattered and his quirk isn't affected. He does have a few scars down one arm from the particularly bad break where it pierced right through his skin, but otherwise he escapes fairly unscathed in the long term. He needs a lot of therapy to stop blaming himself for Izuku's scars though. They both do, to be honest. Fuck it, the whole class needs therapy, both together and individually. But for now, Aizawa will just hold his kid close.